You are listening to the ADHD Support Talk Radio podcast. The ADHD Support Talk Radio podcast is sponsored by ADDclasses.com. Sign up now for a free webinar by going to www.addclasses.com.
Hello and welcome back. My name's Lynne Edris and I'm your host of this episode of ADHD Support Talk Radio. I'm a productivity and ADHD coach. I specialize in working with adult professionals who are struggling to reach their potential due to typical ADHD-related challenges. Disorganization, poor time management, procrastination, weak follow-through, and having too much on your plates. I'm also a woman with ADHD myself, mom to a young man with ADHD, wife to probably the least ADHD man in the universe. And my job is to help my clients start firing on all cylinders in all areas of their lives so that they can have more time and more energy and even more money for the things that they love and the things that they want more of. You can learn more about me, what I do, the services and programs that I offer by visiting my website at www.coachingaddvantages.com. That's coachingadvantages.com with 2 Ds. Sign up for my newsletter there and I'll be happy to share monthly ADHD information and news, what's going on in the ADHD community, podcasts, updates, and all kinds of good stuff. I hope you'll join me. I'm going to talk a little bit more about memory because I felt like I scratched the tip of the iceberg in the last podcast. I spoke about the different kinds of memory, and if it's been a while since you've listened to that one or you've not caught it yet, we basically talk about 4 different kinds of memory with respect to ADHD. We have short-term memory, we have working memory, and we have long-term memory, and we have prospective memory. So short-term memory is the stuff that's in the here and now. That's what we're focused on and what we're holding in our memory right now. And the things that we hold in our short-term memory are there for only about 20 seconds, the experts theorize. We have working memory, which is one of the pieces that were impacted most with ADHD. And working memory is the part of your brain, the part of your memory that holds on to information while you process it. So it's kind of like the RAM in your computer, but it's the part of your brain that holds on to information while you use it. Like the part of your brain that will hold on to someone's name so that you can say it out loud as you're talking to someone. The part of your brain that holds on to a phone number when you dial it. That's your working memory. When something is important enough or makes a big enough impact on us, it goes into our long-term memory. Long-term memory is like the hard drive on your computer. That's where stuff goes to stay. It's not temporary like short-term memory. It's not transient like working memory. Prospective memory is the part of our memory function that enables us to remember things in the future. So it's remembering something that needs to be taken care of in the future. So it's retrieval and working memory kind of comes together. It's important to understand, first of all, with working memory, that working memory is greatly impacted in people with ADHD. So your working memory is a very small amount of space, just like your short-term memory. It can hold an average of, experts call it 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information. So anywhere from 5 to 9 pieces of information, depending on complexity, depending on whether those pieces of information are interrelated, depending on your mental state at the time, depending on your physical and your mental energy at the time. There are all different kinds of things that can impact how many pieces of information you can hold in your working memory. But it is again what we call transient. So things come in, they hang around for a little bit, and then as something else comes in, it pops that existing stuff out. I use a few metaphors to kind of explain this to clients. Another one that I like, I use the coin dozer or the coin drop machine in the last podcast. But if you've ever seen an old school air popcorn popper, that's another way you can visualize how working memory works. So an air popcorn popper has sort of a cavity. There's a little bit of a vessel in there that holds the kernels. And as the kernels pop and that vessel fills, new corn pops, it pushes the first popped kernels down the chute and out into your bowl. That's kind of how your working memory works. Every time something new pops into your awareness or into your working memory, it's going to pop one of the old pieces out and, out of your mind and out of your working memory. So as things come in, they make room for themselves by pushing the older stuff out. That's a big problem with ADHD because we are unable to filter and regulate as much as the rest of the population what comes in. So it's that difficulty regulating attention, that difficulty filtering things out that impacts our working memory, whether it's sensory input, sensory sensations, an itchy tag, all of a sudden you notice that you're too hot, or you have the chills, or you feel a breeze, or whatever it is. It can be sensory input that pushes stuff out of your working memory. It could be things that you notice, things that come into your attention. We have that joke we always say, squirrel, when, the ADD person's distracted by the squirrel running past. Well, that squirrel, seeing that squirrel, noticing that squirrel, and not being able to filter the squirrel out of their attention is pushing stuff out of the working memory. So it's important to understand how the memory works and what the different terms are and how they're impacted by ADHD. Prospective memory is, again, that ability to remember things in the future. So it's the ability to remember what you need to remember when you need to remember it. And in a nutshell, the brain has two different mechanisms for prospective memory. There's one for very short periods of time of prospective memory, which relies heavily on what's in your working memory, and one for longer prospective memory times, which relies on associations. So using working memory to remember something prospectively is very vulnerable and carries a high processing cost. It requires a lot of processing. And it's very vulnerable to those sort of things that pop in and out for us, in and out of our attention. Working memory is really vulnerable to interruption, to distraction, and requires a lot of mental processing, like repeating something over and over until you need to know it. I'll do this all the time, stop for milk, stop for milk, stop for milk, say it over and over and over again as I walk to my car and start the drive home. But that takes a lot of energy and it's very vulnerable. So all it takes is some other sort of information to pop into your awareness, to pop into your working memory, a thought, an idea, a phone call, a crazy driver who cuts you off, and again, an itchy tag, some sort of sensory input, whatever. And that stop for milk piece of information can be bumped off the shelf, the thread that it's dangling from snaps and it's gone. It's out of your working memory. So anything that engages your attention anything that engages you more than that piece of information will disrupt and distract you. And that, anything shinier, so to speak, than stopping for milk is likely to send you home empty-handed, causing what I call a working memory dump, like when your computer loses power and everything in the RAM is gone. So using associations for longer-term prospective memories can be helpful, but that's also vulnerable to distraction and attention. And it's very vulnerable to multitasking. Multitasking, that's a big ADHD topic, and it's a big topic of sort of contention among a lot of people when we talk about ADHD. I don't have time to get into it too much, but that might be another good podcast topic. But it's really important to remember that you can only hold, again, so much information in your working memory at any given time. You really can't fully pay attention to more than one thing at a time. And I'm going to say that again. Neurologically, scientifically, medically, we know that you can't really pay attention to more than one thing at a time. So when you are multitasking, and I think of this multitasking as sort of an intentional disruption, your prospective memory is more likely to fail you. So the more engaged you are in anything else, the more likely you are to forget the things in your prospective memories. So the more we're jumping around from thing to thing to thing to thing, the more likely things are to fall through the cracks. So the more you're going back and forth from one thing to another, the more likely it is that you're going to drop something or you're going to forget something. The more processing power the other thing takes, the more likely it is to bump the thing you're trying to remember out of your prospective memory. For example, like you can fold laundry and watch TV as a way of multitasking. That will work well for most of us because neither one of those things really taxes our processing power that much. But the more processing power either one of the things we're trying to multitask with takes, the less processing power or working memory is available to notice that the time and the place has come when you intended to take action on the other thing in your prospective memory. I hope that makes sense. Multitasking can occur, of course, on purpose. Either we're seeking extra stimulation or because doing the task itself is so painfully boring that you need to dilute it with another activity. The only way you can get something done is to dilute it sometimes. Like, I can only fold laundry. It's really hard for me to bring myself to fold laundry unless I'm watching TV or listening to a podcast or something like that. Or multitasking can happen because of our distractibility. When we interrupt ourselves in the middle of doing one task and move on to something else before finishing the first thing, we call that multitasking, but really it's not. It's just distractibility. So the more of these distractions that are pulling on our attention, the less likely we are to remember our intention to do something in the future. So the more you have going on, the less you can remember. Today's world places greater demands on our ability to regulate our attention than ever before, and more things are competing for our attention all the time. Just think about your smartphone. Like if you have a smartphone, most of the time, for most of us, I think, definitely not all of us, and I think more than many of us, your smartphone's never far from you. So if you're one of those people whose smartphone is always nearby, the text message prompt, the news pop-up, whatever it is, that's always pulling on our attention. There's a lot of stimulation in our worlds now. I think much more than at any time in the history of this planet. So it's really important to keep what happens when you are attempting to multitask in mind so that you can really be selective when you choose to multitask. Speaking of keeping things in mind, mindfulness is an important part of creating prospective memory. And by mindfulness, I don't mean anything too existential or too complicated. I just mean being present, being focused, being tuned in to what we're paying to. By mindfulness, I mean being aware and thoughtful of what you're doing and consciously choosing your focus. It's the opposite of mindlessness, which is characterized by a lack of awareness or like being on autopilot. So when we're mindful and when we're deliberately making ourselves focus on something, this sort of directed and deliberate attention will reinforce the creation of a memory, where failing to give intentional attention to the thing for which you want to create the memory will keep that memory from being solidified to begin with. So when you do something without being mindful or aware of what you're doing, like dropping your keys in an unusual spot, putting your phone down somewhere you don't normally put it, you can't remember that thing, where your keys are, where your phone is, because you never created or solidified a memory to be retrieved later. So mindlessness and distractedness interfere with the creation of a memory. So nothing is ever written to the hard drive, so to speak, and it's impossible to remember what you need to remember at some point in the future with your prospective memory if no memory was really created to begin with. So again, you can't pay attention to more than one thing at a time. And mindfulness is an important part of creating prospective memory. Directed attention will reinforce the creation of the memory, where failing to intentionally give focused attention for the thing you want to create the memory of will keep the memory from being solidified to begin with. And this is not the same as when we have problems retrieving information from our long-term memory, like when a student studies for a test and seems to know the material beforehand but can't seem to produce it when it comes time for testing. In those cases, the memory was previously created, like remembering a person's name and you haven't seen them for a while, having trouble pulling it out. The memory was created, the information was written to the hard drive, so to speak, but we just can't access it at that particular point in time. These kinds of retrieval challenges show up when you can't remember a fact or a name or whatever. And for some of us, this can be due to anxiety, and this is pretty common. It can be due to stress, and stress and anxiety can have very negative effects on memory retrieval. So if you or your child studies for something and seems to really know the information but can't retrieve it when they need it, like for a test, it's likely that anxiety may be interfering with the retrieval, or that the information wasn't sufficiently solidified into memory to begin with. For retrieval challenges such as anxiety, the more anxious we are, the less well our brains work. We can't access our memory as well under stress. Pressure is counterproductive. As anxiety increases, memory decreases, and vice versa. Reducing anxiety can be key, and very likely it will result in an improvement in memory function. The solutions generally lie in controlling the anxiety, such as through stress management techniques and medical treatment if necessary, and improving confidence, which can also greatly reduce anxiety. If the problem is caused because the information wasn't as deeply processed as it needed to be to really be sort of solidified or entrenched in long-term memory to begin with, we want to work on improving solidifying the memories as well. And we do this by working on gaining a deeper understanding of the information, by relating the information to other information and making connections and inferences, and by processing it in multiple different ways, such as different modes of learning, such as asking questions, using different learning styles, maybe flashcards, verbal memory, and some visual and written methods. And these things, of course, work for students, but they work in other parts of your life as well. And don't forget, like, multiple short exposures to information can be better for deeper understanding than longer, more intense exposure, more effective than cramming, so to speak. So studying a little bit for several days before a test or before a situation where retrieval is required is always going to give you a deeper and more solid memory of the information than that one long study cram session the night before. But I think our parents and teachers have told us that for years, our whole lives, right? But seriously, this can be a really tough challenge for some of us. So working on stress reduction coupled with improving confidence can be a big help. And if the situation is causing significant challenges, it may be time to talk to a medical provider or work with a therapist or a coach, to work on anxiety and to work on stress. I'm using school and education as an example here because it's easy and it's kind of an obvious one, but this is applicable, of course, to every area of your life where memory is important, whether it is remembering someone's name at a networking event, whether it is standing up and doing a presentation in front of a bunch of different people. Really, again, self-awareness is key here. Knowing what your strengths are, knowing when you're likely to get yourself into trouble, knowing your situations that you're prone to forgetfulness can help you be able to develop ways to cope and improve your follow-through and improve your memory. Of course, as I always say, letting go of blame and shame enables you to get creative and find solutions to these kinds of problems. Again, most of these problems are behavioral and there are solutions. So we want to accommodate, we want to support the functions that we have in our brain that aren't working as well as we'd want them to. So those areas of our brain that are somewhat impaired because of our ADHD, we just look for ways outside of our brain to compensate for them. Things like reminders, things like task management systems, things like good organization and calendar habits and behaviors. All of those things can help with memory. Knowing that your memory is a challenge and really accepting and internalizing the fact that your memory is sort of the weak link is huge. It's huge. If you can make that sort of understanding, that knowledge, that internalization, it makes accepting the tools that you need to use to compensate for your poor memory that much more solid. It makes the behaviors that much easier to implement, and it makes the habits that much easier to create. So I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but I hope that helps, and I hope there's something in here that you do find helpful. Again, this is Lynne Edris, productivity and ADHD coach with coachingaddvantages.com. I appreciate you coming. I hope you'll find us on iTunes. Like us, leave a comment, leave a review. That will help other people find us. And I look forward to chatting at you again sometime soon. Thanks for coming and thanks for your attention.